Welcome back to Sidewalk, Skyline podcast. On today's episode, I am interviewing Graham Gibson. Graham is the Director of Cultural Engagement Studies at Masters College and Seminary, located in Peterborough, Ontario. And we are going to be talking about the whole idea of Canada as a mission field. Let's go now to my interview. Graham, it's really good to be here with you at our alma mater, Masters College and Seminary. And back in our day, it was Eastern Pentecostal Bible College.
Yeah.
And what do you remember about your first time showing up at this institution?
Well, I was married 1 week before we got here. So
Wow.
both my wife and I came to be students at the same time, married, and so we lived off campus. And that's a different experience because you really feel the challenge of trying to connect with students on campus who live in dorms together, and you can't enter into their dorm space, and you can't eat in the cafeteria,
Yeah.
you can't bring outside food in and that sort of thing. So, and there was no common areas here for off-campus students. So it was a bit of a challenge, but we really started to connect with other people who are also couples on campus.
Yeah, what was that like being newlyweds and studying full-time? Because, you know, post-secondary is not a cakewalk where you're sitting around at night.
No, well, see, when I was in high school, I don't think I wrote an actual essay.
Yeah.
In my entire high school. But my wife had been through 2 years of college, and she's brilliant. And I think I had a huge learning curve. So I spent a lot of evenings and weekends doing a lot of schoolwork, and didn't have time for a lot of the social aspect of school that maybe other students had. But I did learn how to work hard.
Mm-hmm.
That's what really trained me.
When I came, my home church back in Windsor, where my dad was pastor, it was 1980, and by that time, at least at our church, there was less of a dress code and
I came with a beard.
Yeah, you came with a beard.
I had a beard since I was 16, and I came with a beard. And the first thing I showed up on campus, and this registrar comes up to me, young man, you can't have a beard at school and register. And I said I registered through the mail or something, and I walked away from her. But I had to shave my beard off, and I went into shock.
Yeah.
But there was stricter standards here. You couldn't wear jeans.
So I didn't own any dress clothes to speak of. I might have had like my grade 8 graduation suit or something, but so I, before I came to college and read the dress code, I went to Byway.
Oh yeah,
and bought a bunch of dress shirts.
Yes. There's no Value Village.
Yeah. No Value Village back. Well, actually, there were thrift stores, and I went to a yard sale, and in Windsor, some old man had passed away, and so his wife was having a yard sale.
Oh dear!
And I bought a little suitcase of ties. And the ties that was 1980, so it was like coming into the narrow tie, new wave kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I had these ties that were like 12 inches wide, I think, and every kind of color.
Clown ties.
And one of my grandpas I'd been visiting him, and he had a bunch of really old bow ties, and so
they're cool.
Yeah, well. They weren't then, but I made them cool. And in fact, we had a band in Bible college we called the Bow Ties. And so, anyways, a lot of memories here. And
yes, sir.
Well, we were just kids.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah.
I was 19 when I showed up.
Yeah.
Crazy.
So, anyways, take me back a little bit about before Bible college, before Linda. Talk about how you came to Jesus.
Wow. Well, first thing is I'm a fourth generation Pentecostal pastor.
Oh, so you came to Jesus 4 generations.
Yeah, I go way back. No, my great-grandfather came into Pentecost somewhere in 1917 or something in the Winnipeg area.
Mm-hmm.
He was a Methodist.
Yeah.
Bible cold porter, sold Bibles, had a horse cart and all of that.
Wow.
And then he sort of fell into Pentecostalism and started pastoring, and then moved to the Brantford area and started building relationships with Six Nations Indigenous people there, but he didn't pastor that, he just worked alongside. And so there's a history there I wasn't aware of at all. I grew up in a pastor's home with my dad being a pastor, and my grandfather had. And I thought that's probably what I was going to end up doing too, and I resisted it. But when I was 8, we were just driving in a car somewhere as a family, and my mom and I were having a conversation, and she asked me if I wanted to receive Christ in my life, and I said, yeah, I do. And it changed, the direction of my life from that point on.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting when you talk to people that didn't have that childhood conversion experience.
Yeah.
They look at us like we're from another planet.
Well, it's not everybody's story.
Not everybody's story, but I mean, then learning to walk with God and learning to navigate your life with God.
Yeah. I took it seriously.
Yeah.
You're still a kid.
Yeah.
You don't understand all of that, but it always meant something to me. So, I drifted a bit when I was in my teen years.
Yeah.
I had a 73 Charger jacked up with mags, and
Bet you wish you still had it, eh?
yeah, the only one that got kicked off Braeside Camp just because I drove in there and I had my thrush muffler and they didn't know who I was, and my hair was long back then. Whatever. But you drifted a little bit, but down underneath, you knew where you stood with God, and it wasn't going to change.
Yeah.
And so that solidified when I was about going on 18.
Yeah.
And I knew that God wasn't going to let me go. So I figured, okay, that's the direction my life is going to go. I always thought my brother would do it. He was 2 years older than me, and he could play the piano and I couldn't. I thought you had to do that to be a pastor.
Yeah.
So anyways, God got a hold of me.
Yeah.
Couldn't get away from it. Yeah.
So when you came here to Bible college, lived in Peterborough off campus.
That's right.
Let's kind of walk through, from the time you graduated here, and take me on a, sort of the quick list of where all the places you went and how many times you came back here.
Oh my goodness, Peterborough. Can't get away from this place.
Yeah.
Well, okay, came here, did 3 years of Bible schooling. They only had 3 at the time.
Yeah.
Didn't have the BTH quite in place yet. Yeah. And left here, went to Emmanuel Bible College and finished my BRE and then my BTH there in Kitchener. And thought, okay, maybe I'm ready. And nothing was opening up. And so when I was in high school, I never wanted to do any more schooling for the rest of my life. I never wanted to do it. And yet it's the only door God kept allowing to open. And other doors seemed like they were open, and then bang, they slammed shut. And so I ended up going from Emmanuel Bible College to Tyndale, which was Ontario Theological Seminary at the time, and did my first master's degree there in theology, and got hired by a church in Collingwood, at Parkway Pentecostal, and was on sort of the associate pastor for a couple of years, and finished my master's. I was almost finished, and they laid me off because there was a financial crisis in the church, and they had to let me go. I didn't know what I was going to do. Everything was upside down. And at that point, I had a chance to teach one course, a 2-week block course in Pickle Lake, which is about 7 hours north of Thunder Bay.
Yeah, I've passed by Pickle Lake. I haven't.
Have you?
I didn't turn up the road and go there.
Oh, okay.
That's a ways away.
It's yeah. So it was in the far north, and so I went up there to teach the course. Linda went with me, and about a week into it, we realized once we arrived there that the person who was the principal of that is a school for Indigenous peoples who want to be pastors, and it was 1 week into it, and we just kind of looked at each other because the principal had left before we got there. He arranged for us to come, and then he disappears.
Yeah.
And so we're sitting in his house with like 3 pieces of furniture in the place and looking out over a lake in the middle of the bush. And we looked at each other and went, oh no, this is what God has. And so they asked us to stay there. So I stayed as the principal for 4 years, ran the Native Bible College, and came back to do more studies because I thought we don't know what we're doing. People have been working with Indigenous people for a long time. Pentecostals have worked with them. And I was watching how that school was set up and how it was being run, and I said, no, we can't be doing this. This isn't going to work. And it had so many elements of colonial mentality and stuff. Yeah. And it wasn't something I was particularly trained in. I just sensed this isn't right.
Yeah.
So we ended up coming back, and so long story short, did some training at Wilfrid Laurier and on. We can go back to that if you want to.
Let's stop at Pickle Lake for a minute.
Yeah, okay.
4 years, and what was that, late 80s by then?
87 to 91.
87 to 91.
Yeah.
So 4 years in Pickle Lake. You're a Southern Ontario guy for all your life.
Never spent any real time with Indigenous people at all. Had very little preparation for that.
So talk to me about how that changed you and Linda.
Goodness.
You know, how did 4 years in Pickle Lake, spending your time with Aboriginal believers?
Right.
You know what?
Well,
how did that mess you up?
Okay. Well, first let me say that I heard my grandfather singing songs in Cree.
Wow.
Because his father had worked with Indigenous people north of Winnipeg way, way back. And I didn't know any of that. I just heard him singing these songs, and I thought, okay, what is that? And my father pastored in Muskokas when I was a kid, and so in Huntsville, he took me out to someone's home, this gentleman who was Algonquin, and I saw him stretching a beaver pelt. And that's it's my earliest memory of ever meeting someone who was Indigenous. But I had no understanding of the culture at all, because there weren't any Indigenous people I knew around living where we were. So getting to Pickle Lake, I did some research myself, but it was elementary. Getting there, I thought the only way I'm going to do this is if I go in as a learner, not as an expert.
Yep.
It doesn't matter what my education is. I don't know this.
Yeah.
And sitting there with students who are not that much younger than me, and listening to their stories and hearing them talk about what it feels like to be in it was the Bible school that they planted up in Pickle was outside of the white community. So they thought, well, they probably don't want to live amongst white people. So they put them on an edge of a lake in the bush and created this little campus with a bunch of log cabins and a couple of faculty homes, a little church building, and a classroom.
Yeah.
So what does that feel like? Because white people thought that was the best solution. They'll love living in the bush. They didn't love living in the bush. Indigenous people lived with their community. Their community's not there.
Yeah.
They've got a bunch of white people who are staff of the college watching them 24/7. That's what started registering in my head.
Yeah.
I said, you know what? I know what it's like a little bit to be on the outside. This is wrong. There's something fundamentally wrong here.
Yeah.
And we were observing them and training them to be good Anglo-Canadian pastors.
Yeah.
And that didn't sit well with me. And I listened to them, and they said, a couple of individuals really opened up, and they said, you know, it feels like we're in jail. And it took me a while to figure out what do they mean by that. But they meant they're being observed. They're being shaped, retrained. They're isolated from their community and their families. And they can't get back out without our help. I said, we got to change this. So I finally talked the district people into shutting down that school, moving it out of there and moving it to Sidewalk, which had significant Indigenous population in town where they could choose where they live. They're not living with staff. They're not observed all the time.
Yeah.
And saying, you know what, we need an Indigenous board that's in charge of the school so they start shaping what it should be like. Yeah. And that's when we started to indigenize that college. But sitting with them, spending time snowshoeing, walking through the bush, doing firewood together, listening to them the whole time, it radically changed me. And I sat with some of their elders from the churches, because we oversaw churches all the way up to James Bay, Hudson Bay, and the entire northern scope of Ontario, North Ontario, from Lake Superior up. So we would go into these communities, and I'd sit with the elders and say, so what does it feel like to have white people in charge of the mission, the work up here?
Yeah.
And what are your concerns about your students who are down there in the Bible school?
Yeah.
And when they would talk, I was surprised how open they would be. I thought, why are they talking to me like this? Because they don't know me that well. They started to, but I think they realized there was someone trying to listen. And that hadn't been the case for a long time. As my understanding anyway. So I just listened and realized by the end of 4 years there, not only did I need to get out and take some more training, formal training on Indigenous cultures, Indigenous religions, and not only did I need to do that, but I needed to step away from being in charge. They didn't need me to come back and now take over with a new understanding of who they are. I needed to be replaced by them. And I couldn't go back. That was hard, but I thought it was the only healthy way to go. And when I did that, they brought in another white person to run the Bible school. And within several years, it was gone.
Yeah.
They shut it down.
Yeah.
Because the Indigenous board shut it down.
Yeah.
See?
Yeah.
So it really shifted not only my direction, but it shifted the entire sort of philosophy of missional work amongst Indigenous people. And that's kind of the foundation that I bring to my teaching here. I did go on to more education on that, but I really, really feel that if I hadn't had that experience living with and amongst and listening to the Indigenous students and the elders in the churches, I don't think I'd be who I am today. I wouldn't be able to do what we get to do here. So, yeah.
It's interesting, the multi-generational aspect, of your grandfather, having ministry.
Well,
to
great-grandfather.
Great-grandfather, yeah. Yeah.
And I didn't know that until I was in Pickle Lake. I didn't know any of that history.
Yeah.
The family didn't bother to talk about it.
Yeah.
But it must have instilled something in me, a sensitivity maybe. So.
It sounds like those years really helped you to ask yourself the right questions, or for God to be able to ask you, examine your heart.
Yeah,
right? And not just your own heart, but the heart of the church culture that we've come from.
That's it.
Yeah.
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 Well, you know, we grew up in a culture that was predominantly, well, dominated by Anglo-white
Yep.
male culture. I think what this did is it helped me really grapple with. I'm not going to say I fully understand because I'm not
Yeah.
Indigenous. I'm not female.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not non-white.
Yeah.
But it helped me understand what some of the issues and concerns are, and to hear their stories opens that up for someone who can't personally experience it.
Yeah.
To say, you know what, there's something here. There's
Mhm.
something here that we've got to address in the Pentecostal assemblies, in the white Southern culture, and all that. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
So you went back to school.
Yeah, I
And
did. Yeah.
Run through.
We'll do a
all
quick
this
run
real
through.
quick run through the schooling. Yeah.
Yeah. So I came back from the north there to go to Wilfrid Laurier University and did an MA in religion and culture,
Mhm.
which is a combination of religious studies and cultural anthropology.
Mhm.
And I really liked that because it wasn't, they weren't segregated. It was recognizing that culture shapes a person's religious tradition.
Mhm.
And that's actually okay.
Yeah.
And it's not just that Indigenous people need to get to do that with their Pentecostalism, but to recognize that us Anglo-Canadians did it too,
Yeah.
right? And we aren't very self-reflective. We think what we've got is universal Christianity.
Right.
Exactly, right? And so that helped me not only understand how else it could look, but to critique my own.
Mhm.
And so I did that, and then went on from there to U of T to do PhD work in religious studies, and I was studying Indigenous Pentecostalism. That was what my dissertation was about, and the name of my dissertation was Dancing in the Fire.
Dancing in the Fire.
Indigenous Pentecostals.
Mm.
And I studied camp meetings.
Hmm.
Indigenous camp meetings
Yeah.
up in the north, and I
Yeah.
went there and did my field research. I sort of wrote my dissertation 3 times because my committee kept getting changed, and with the new committee member in charge, they wanted something different, and then I would rewrite it, and finally I ended up withdrawing from the program, so I've got an all but defended ABD.
Mm.
I didn't actually get the PhD on that.
Yeah.
They were going to require me to take a year off to redo it again from teaching, and I said I can't do that.
Yeah.
So I just stopped. But all the stuff I learned through the entire process really feeds into what I get to do and teach and so forth.
Mm.
So that's the summary of my education.
So then how did you end up back here?
Well, okay, so when I was doing my master's at Laurier, Paul Coles, who was running the mission program here at the college, called me and asked me if I would come and teach a course on developing Indigenous leadership. And I just started that way. He asked me to be missionary in residence, which means I could teach a course on campus, live locally, and be a resource to people who were students that were in the mission program, so they could learn informally from me, just lots of conversations.
Mhm.
I started that way, so it was part-time in 1995.
Mhm.
And then Paul Coles took a 2-year sabbatical, went to Ethiopia to help set up some training stuff over there. And I got to be in charge of the program here for 2 years. And then they hired me full-time from 2000 on. So I've been here for longer than all the other teachers right here. And I'm the old guy. But that's how we end up
But
back.
you still
in
got a
Peterborough.
boyish face.
Yeah, whatever. Keep saying it, yeah. The beard hides lots. Okay, but coming back to Peterborough to teach, and I was back here a few years, and then the college moves to Toronto.
Right.
In
So
2000
you're part of that transition?
Yeah, I'm full-time in 2000. 2003, I moved to Toronto, And 2010, it came back. So Peterborough when I started Bible school, Peterborough when I started teaching, Peterborough again after it comes back from Toronto. The Toronto experiment wasn't as effective as they wanted it to be, and we came back to this campus, and so that's 3 times.
Yeah, there was still something good about the Toronto experiment, that the concept of it.
The concept, it was good.
I mean, there was a lot of drama and a lot of struggles, but that idea that our students need to be in the culture, right?
That's exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I always said that Peterborough is a bit isolated from where a lot of cultural diversity. Peterborough's changed.
Yeah.
It's a lot different than it used to be. But I really wanted them to get, as students, to get into a context where there was all that much more multiculturalism, and you could not just go to different restaurants, but you could attend different churches, do internships, and feel that in those contexts. And it's not just the ethnic diversity, it's the subcultures of the urban context, right? There's suburbs, there's the urban core, there's all kinds of little subcultural elements there that would be so rich for them and so broad for a spectrum for students to choose where to get experience and what they would like to do with their calling.
Right.
And I thought it was, philosophically, it was a great idea. It just wasn't executed well.
Right.
So we ended up back here. But that's why I really started shifting the program here. Paul Coles left to go to Kenya, Nairobi, to run doctoral programs and stuff there, and I took over the missions program here. And we changed it from being a missions program to being a cross-cultural studies program. You get the shift? Yeah. There's a bit of a problem.
It's not us and them.
Yeah.
Now it's about how do I discover people that I don't share much with.
Yeah.
They're in another frame of thinking. The
worldview could be different.
Their traditions, their values.
Yes, there's lots of cultural difference, and this is where my anthropology really starts coming through, because I really appreciate the differences and want that encouraged in the student body. So we changed it from a mission program, which sounds like we don't need missionizing here in Canada. It sounds like it's elsewhere. The mentality of missions. And instead saying, let's just talk about being cross-cultural. Wherever you are going to be. If you're in the urban core, you still have to cross into someone else's cultural context when you simply start working with people who are just different from you. It doesn't have to be ethnic to be different. So that's where that started to shift.
So with the students here, there are a couple times when you get to travel with students. I know that downtown Toronto is an hour and a half away, and that there's something you do there, and then you guys also do a missions trip. You want to talk about those things?
Yeah. Well, the idea of trips really was started by Lyman Kulathungam, who taught here years ago. He taught ethics and world religions and philosophy, stuff like that. And he started doing a trip where they visited different religious sites in Toronto. And I continue to this day doing it. I just took it over with from him, and it's really eye-opening for students. And I saw what it was doing. One day, getting to go to a mosque, a gurdwara, a Buddhist temple, that sort of thing. And I saw that what was happening, because the experiential learning element of not just hearing about it in class and reading it from a textbook, but hear from them in their context. Let's hear from an imam. And how does he explain his tradition rather than somebody writing about it?
Right.
And then come back and reflect on that assignment and say, okay, why is it what I'm learning from a person is different from what I'm learning from a book? Then So I took that, what I was observing from that experience, and I said, well, why don't we take them into the urban core then? Let's get them outside of Peterborough and take them back into Toronto and say, okay, what subcultures are you seeing here? Not just ethnicities, and there's both, but where are the gaps that the church is not reaching?
Right.
Who are the people groups that the church doesn't relate to and hasn't, shall we say, missionized, or hasn't crossed into someone's cultural context so that they can communicate the gospel in a way those people will understand,
Right.
rather than making them come into our context, show up at our church and figure it out. Why can't we go to them? And I said, people aren't coming to the church anyways. We have to go to where they are and sort of incarnate ourselves into their missional context,
Right.
their cultural context, and say,
We all have to go to Pickle Lake.
yeah,
We all have to go.
we all have to get out of our
Yeah.
our context and get rattled a little bit.
Yeah.
Talk to real people.
Yeah.
Don't read a book on urban culture.
Yeah.
I mean, it's good to do. I'm not against that. Obviously,
Yeah.
I've done education,
Great.
but it didn't fully prepare me.
Yeah.
What really got through to me was talking to people.
Yeah.
And getting into their context. See, how do they live? What are their realities? What are their values? What are they trying to get out? And say, how does the gospel touch that? Because I don't know how it does, because that's not something my culture's taught me yet. And so when you do that, you begin to realize Jesus can incarnate himself into any cultural context.
See, there still is part of you that is that high school kid that doesn't want to go back to school.
Oh my goodness. I've been in school all my life and I can't get away from it. But yeah.
But no, I mean, you're actually seeing the value of education.
Yes.
That it has to be, the orthodoxy has to be wed to the orthopraxy, right?
Exactly.
There has to be...
There's theory and practice.
Yeah. And if we don't get there, then, well, it can be interesting if you like...
Yeah, you can't stay in the theoretical.
No.
Somebody has to figure out, how do you make that work?
Yeah.
And I don't think you can really understand it until you engage the culture. Which is why we then changed our program to cultural engagement, not crossing cultures, but cultural engagement. What is it we're really trying to accomplish here?
Yeah.
We don't want to just figure out how to enter into their cultural context so we can live amongst them. We want to engage that.
Yeah.
Right? And it's not until then that you begin to understand what the gospel was supposed to mean for them.
So talk to me about, I mean, I don't know what the current enrollment of the college here is.
I don't either.
You don't either?
No, we've got online students. We've got hybrids where sometimes they're in class, but they're doing it through Zoom
under 100, right?
On campus, yeah.
Yeah, on campus.
Yeah, on
and then
campus,
others that are in other... So as you're engaged with the lives of students, I mean, guys our age, interacting with people that are 40 years younger.
Yeah.
There is a sense in which even to have a relationship, you're going to Pickle Lake, right? You know, you're learning how to understand their culture, their values, and so what are some things that you've observed? You have students that come here. Some come from tiny little towns and grew up on a farm, or some grew up, downtown Toronto, and some
rural
Newfoundland,
Whatever,
and some global students. And so talk to me a bit about some of your students and what it's like to walk alongside them and watching the light come on. What you learned from them. So maybe there's 2 or 3 stories of students that just kind of like that's why I'm here. This is, watching their lives unfold. Talk a bit about that. Talk about the students.
Okay. I'm impressed by this generation. Every generation's different. I'm old enough to have seen a number of them.
Yep.
This generation is more entrepreneurial. They're more open to diversity. They want to do something for Christ that hasn't been done before. And they're willing to step out and do it. But they don't do it, they don't want to do it without mentoring, without someone that walks alongside them. This is where a lot of pastors our age don't get it. They think, just launch them out, just go. Just go do it.
Because that's what we had to do.
Yeah, we had to do. We had no choice.
Yeah.
But the students now are saying, show me. They're not looking for the best theology. They want to know truth, but they want to know, how does it work? What is it like to be filled with the Spirit and hear the Spirit's voice and get directed to do things? Show me how to do that. Walk alongside me. And I really love that. I love walking alongside with the students. When we go downtown Toronto, we walk the streets. We're not in some tourist van looking around.
The double-decker.
We're walking the streets with people who are there. They live their lives and do their ministry in that urban core. They're walking with them and talking with them and engaging. That's really important to this generation. They're tired of people who espouse all the things that are right, but never know how to do it. They want to see people who are filled with the Spirit, and how does that work in your life?
Yeah.
They want to see people who can engage other cultures and say, okay, show me how you did that. What are the things I need to know to be sensitive there, and so forth. So going downtown Toronto, and we also go to the Dominican. I take all the first year students to the Dominican for 10 days every January. It's a hard thing to do, but but the idea is it's not a missions trip. It's to experience how to cross into someone else's cultural context. And I have a leadership team, and we walk with those students through the experience of crossing into the cultural context there, so that they can learn from that and use it in any context here, right? So I think this generation is really unique, and they want to do something that's different. So many students now talk about they don't want to just be pastors in the church that exists.
Right.
Some of them just want to do something that gets them into the society that they have a heart and burden for.
Yeah.
Let's become more missional. There's so many students that just want to reach people for Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
And how are we going to do that? Because asking people to come to church isn't working.
Right.
Doing a great program and a great music performance isn't cutting it. They got better out there. Why would they bother coming to the church for that? So all the old strategies aren't appealing to their generation. In fact, Christianity has a bad taste in people's mouths. So how do we express Christianity to people in this cultural context in Canada, let alone globally? They want to know how you do that, and they want to watch you do it.
Yeah.
Right? So
I know you're not supposed to have favorites.
Okay,
but
well,
are there is there any stories of students that I mean, they just they're on your trophy shelf though?
Wow. Well, there's one that stands out in particular. Her name's Amy Heyer.
Yeah, I know Amy.
You know Amy?
Yeah.
And she grew up, we met her family. They were part of our staff up in Pickle Lake. And so I knew her from when she was 2 years old. And they ended up going to was West Africa, Angola. And so she did a lot of her growing up in Angola, and when her parents came back to Canada, 7 or 8 years later, she went back as a missionary all by herself, and she would capture wild horses or buy horses and train them. She's kind of a horse whisperer.
Wow.
And she's got an amazing talent for training horses. And she did that, and then she would sell the horses and support her mission work through that. I mean, how creative is that?
Yeah.
So she comes with that, and then she did that for a number of years, and then she comes back to Canada and says, I need more training. So she came back to Bible school here. And one of my students, she graduated, 2 years ago, and she's now set up a horse ranch outside of Peterborough that is sort of like a mental health ministry, where she takes adults or kids.
Equine therapy.
Yeah, it's not just horses. She's got a couple of cows and a few other things, but it's sort of like animal therapy. Whatever the person relates best to, that's what they're drawn to, and she helps them build a relationship sort of with those animals, but in so doing, provide therapy and share the gospel as she builds relationships. And this is the real key that I see as different, is the building of relationships with people so you win the right to speak to them about Jesus Christ is different from what we used to do, where we just stood up and preached at people.
Well, we had missionaries in foreign fields, right?
Yep.
And many of them understood that.
Yeah.
They learned that.
Yeah.
They went like you going to pick a
When you're the minority, you start to figure that out.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can't get away with this.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
yeah.
I mean, are there missionaries in history that were colonizers? I mean, in that negative sense, yeah, probably. But I think there's probably an awful lot of missionaries who they were there to learn culture and to earn the right and find the language, find the way to be a messenger of God.
Yeah. So another student is Heather LeQuant, and she went up to Thunder Bay.
Yeah.
She thought she was going to the Arctic, and she's a good old Newfoundlander.
Yeah.
Just sweet, what a sweetheart. But God spoke to her about Indigenous people, and so she went to Thunder Bay, and she's working on her master's in counseling, I believe. But she began to work with North Wind's ministry up there, and she started out just building relationships with families that are in Thunder Bay, Indigenous people there. And she is so effective that they started flying her into reserves in the north when there was family crisis going on. And she begins this, she has this unique way of just putting people at ease. She's got that sense of humor and yet that huge caring heart, but she's not stupid. Like, she knows when to step in and when to speak and when not to speak and so forth. And she's really fit in, and it seems that the Indigenous people are really responding to her and get that she's not Indigenous, but she gets them. And that's what we're looking for, is people who can go into another cultural context and engage to the point where the people say, okay, now you get us. You're not us, but you understand what our issues are. Now we'll listen. And they're listening to her, and she's helping families and youth in crisis and kids. Like, she works with the full scope of it in a way that's not like she's in charge, but she's strengthening, bringing hope and strength and all of that. And I'm amazed at what she's doing these days. That's what we're looking for. David Burke, he's down, another one of my graduates, right? He's down in Ryerson.
Ryerson is just in the midst of changing its name.
Yes. For some reason.
Trying to get away from that
colonial past,
right?
Right?
I mean, Ryerson was a Christian.
Yes. Believed in education.
Yeah.
Interesting thing is, Ryerson helped the Ojibwe. In
Mississauga.
Ojibwe on Six Nations Reserve to set up their own school system that was run by Indigenous people themselves.
Yeah.
But people don't know that part of his history because so much of what he did was so colonial in mentality. But there was one kind of interesting, intriguing offshoot of that. But yeah, so David is down at Ryerson, whatever they're going to call that now, and he's working with university students from all kinds of backgrounds, and he's not set up a traditional church. Yeah. This is the thing. This generation wants to see how can the church be expressed in our culture so that it doesn't sound like the church that has been there in the past that people are offended at.
Right. And David's doing a great job. In my sort of foray into urban ministry and looking at it on a broader scale, Steve Pike from Denver taught me something about the HD. Not high definition, but the 3 HD. The first is high density. That urban is high density. It's when you have more people per square kilometer than you would in a suburb or a rural. So high density. And then he talks about high diversity. That when you are in an urban context, you have much more exposure to a diversity of cultures. And then the third D is high disparity, where the Maserati and the shopping cart filled with tin cans, are bumper to bumper. There's that.
One neighborhood's affluent, the next neighborhood is.
Yeah, and they're right on top of each other. So. Being in Peterborough the last couple of days, I've once again reflected on how different Peterborough was in 1980 when I first came here. Or 1978 for you.
Very white, very old.
Yep, white, old. It was just a stately little town city. And but today, let's talk about the urbanization of Peterborough, and what are the realities that you see in Peterborough today in terms of the HDs, in terms of this is not grandma's city anymore.
No. This is what the churches are really trying to grapple with, because our churches still tend to be
grandma's church.
Yeah. But so you have the city is now close to 90,000. Wasn't that when we were here?
No.
It used to be white and Anglo and old. It used to have the pretty close to the highest demographic of people over 80 in this town, right? A lot of that has changed, and part of it's because of the universities and colleges here, but I think people have been forced out of Toronto with the cost of housing, and people have started to buy in Peterborough a lot more, so you find there's lots of subdivisions springing up and growth happening here, and a lot of that growth is diverse. It is religiously and culturally diverse, so you got a good mix of restaurants, and that it's a little bit of evidence that there's got to be some new diversity showing up here. So used to be the strongest other culture in town would have been Indigenous, because the Indigenous population surrounding here,
Curve Lake.
But it's certainly grown from that. Economic diversity in Peterborough is the biggest thing that you'll notice, though. It's not just young and multicultural, but it is becoming very clear the haves and the have-nots. And I think the church is really starting to grapple with that one. So yeah, tent city, you have that every once in a while in the parks, and then they shut it down.
Yeah.
There's been conflict between police and people in street cultures and that. But the city is really interested in trying to do something about that, and there's new projects starting to spring up, like the tiny house projects, where you can have small homes that'll house people who are homeless and that.
Yeah.
So they're trying to get really creative here in the city. And so you have someone like Scott Cooper.
Yeah.
Scott Cooper is...
You have a relationship with Scott, don't you?
Yeah. Scott was my pastor for 10 years at Northview Church here in town. And I knew him from way back because he was in Kitchener for a while. And he did mission stuff over in Uzbekistan and some of those places. So he certainly traveled and engaged other cultures. But when he was pastoring here, a great deal of his ministry was focusing on people outside the church. And he was good for that.
Mm-hmm.
But he hadn't looked at the economic disparity.
Right.
And when he finished 10 years, he thought, I had this conversation with him where he said, I feel like I'm done. I'm not going to take this congregation further. And so he resigns, but he doesn't move out of town. He didn't pick another opportunity. And we had this conversation one day. We were sitting in his garage and had this conversation where we said, what's going on? He's trying to figure out what is it God's trying to do with them, because he's out of a job and he's sitting in his home and he doesn't feel like he's supposed to leave.
Mm-hmm.
And I just got chatting with him, and we kind of came up with this idea. Maybe God's not done with you here.
Mm.
He started thinking about that, and
ain't that the truth?
I said, have you looked at Mission Canada?
Yeah.
With the Pentecostal assemblies. They want, in a sense, we want to plant missionaries in our urban contexts.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that word missionary is problematic, but we want to incarnate people into cultural contexts where the church hasn't been working.
Yeah.
And he got thinking about that, and he started, I guess, approaching Mission Canada, developing this idea, and he's now street advocate. He started a ministry called Street Level Advocacy for people who are on the streets in Peterborough, and building a relationship between them and the police community, because he's also the chaplain of the police. And he rides a bike. He's just a real down-to-earth guy. And he walks the streets, and he engages people, and he talks to them, gets to know them, and starts helping them and seeing, okay, what do you really need? There's a service agency over here who might be able to help you or whatever, and puts them in contact. But when there's conflict, the police know they can call him. And he can come and kind of de-escalate the situation, because he also knows people that are on the streets, built relationship with them. He says, here's the real issue. And the cops can just settle down a little bit.
Theologically, he's like the paraclete, right?
The one that comes alongside.
The one who comes alongside.
Exactly. Yeah. And so that's what he's doing. And unbelievable, the things that are emerging out of that. We have yet to see where that's going. But the people in his church were, well, why didn't you stay and be our pastor? Why did you quit? And basically he's saying, I think God needed us to reach this people group. And we couldn't do it the way we were. Right?
If you got to run programs and have a board, and
it's not about programs, it's about relationships. It's getting into that community. And that's really what we're about in this college, is training students to do that kind of thing. Get yourself into someone else's cultural context and embed yourself until you know how the gospel has something to offer here and you can speak their language.
Do you feel like God is doing something fresh in Peterborough? Scott would be a part of that.
Part of that,
But what else is happening that you're seeing in Peterborough among, that church?
Well, the church, I think, in Peterborough has, over the years, had a heart for the city, and they've tried various things, food banks and clothing outlets and so forth. But I see that a different generation began to rise up, I don't know, in the last 5 to 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
A generation of people that don't care what denomination you belong to, we're going to do this cross-denominationally together.
Yeah.
And they're getting out onto the streets and they're just talking about Jesus Christ to people.
Yeah.
And they're taking our students and saying, hey, come with us.
Yeah.
Let's get out on the streets. Let's just talk to people.
Yeah.
It reminds me of Jesus walking through the streets and sees Zacchaeus sitting up in the tree there.
Yeah.
Hey, let's go have coffee. There's something going on. They get together, the young adults of this community are gathering together, again, interdenominationally. They just gather together probably once a month or more, and they just have worship and prayer events. And it's powerful. And out of that is coming a missional heart for their own city. And I haven't really seen that. It's usually some professional or some pastor, or it's,
this is grassroots.
This is grassroots. It's emerging out of the churches.
Yeah.
That's different. We didn't grow up with that.
No.
That's something that God's doing in this generation that I'm excited about. Because they're going to do stuff we've never seen before. And I love that. I'm open for that.
Yeah. Well, Graham, just want to maybe wrap up with one more question. And, the question I would ask is, if you had, if you could 10x your efforts, the things that matter to you, what would you do if you had the time, the money, the people, the open doors? If you could ratchet it up and be. Now I know you can't afford to be 10 times busier.
Right.
But if you were 10 times smarter,
that would be nice.
What would it look? What's the dream? What's your dream? And because God's not limited by our age. He waits until 80 years old to get some guys started. And we're not there, so we got
not yet.
Not there yet. So what? You got a dream, or the dream that you're in?
Yeah.
What would go beyond your life to what?
Yeah.
What would you? What's the legacy? What are you shooting for?
I guess my dream is for a generation and beyond. Maybe a trajectory is better than a generation. A trajectory for the church where it's rediscovers its missional passion. And it begins to realize that the Church of Jesus Christ is for those who aren't in the church yet. They're not in the family, and they don't know why they should be. I want a generation of people to emerge, leaders to emerge, who will start motivating not individuals, but movements of people who will go outside the church to where people are. And not be attractional, saying, you have to get them into the church so they can hear the gospel, being incarnational. Let's get our believers into where non-believers are. And I just think we would start making inroads into all kinds of corners of Canada that have never really been reached if we changed that mentality. And I don't think... I love the church. The Church of Jesus Christ is his bride, and we should never badmouth the church. I'm not sure that the cultural expression of the church that we've developed is doing the job it should be doing.
She might need some new clothes.
Yeah. Okay. She might need a mindset change.
Yeah.
But I'm looking for a generation that's much more spirit-filled and spirit-led and missionally minded, because I think we'll start to see a little more of what the early church was able to see. And I don't mean that we have to be the early church. I'm just saying the church should not have changed who it is.
Yeah.
And stop being complacent, like we got it figured out here.
Yeah.
Let's learn from other peoples and let the diversity of voices, the diversity of worldview and culture begin to shape who we are instead of us always shaping them. And maybe we'll be a much more rich and healthy church from it. I guess that's kind of where I'm going.
Yeah.
I want to pour myself into the leaders of the next generation.
Yeah. And So we need to be one.
Yeah.
You know, be one. Bingo.
You won. We need to be one ourselves.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Graham.
Appreciate this.
Great having this conversation.
Thank you. You're a good friend, Kevin.
Thanks.
Well, I really enjoyed that conversation with Graham Gibson at Masters College and Seminary in the city of Peterborough, Ontario. On our next episode, I'm going to interview Todd Carlton. Todd Carlton is a firefighter, and he would tell you that he's a full-time minister and a part-time firefighter, even though the hours actually are flipped the other way. And he is involved in an organization called Disciple a City. Disciple a City is committed to sharing the gospel in urban contexts. And this is going to be an exciting episode as you get to hear about his own journey to faith and how the Lord got a hold of him. And then just some of the ways that he is experiencing God at work in the streets of Peterborough. So please come back and catch our next episode. Until then, you've been listening to Sidewalk, Skyline podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Rogers. Keep coming back for more.